This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. A carbon footprint is the amount of carbon dioxide pollution that we produce as a result of activities. Some people try to reduce their carbon footprint because they are concerned about climate change. Now, researchers have a way for people to measure how much nitrogen pollution they produce. Their nitrogen footprint. All plants and animals need nitrogen. Nitrogen is a major element in the proteins in our bodies. The atmosphere is mostly nitrogen. In the early 20th century, scientists learned how to take nitrogen out of the air and make it into a form that plants could use. University of Virginia professor Jim Galloway calls synthetic nitrogen fertilizer a wonderful invention because it increased food production. But he says many parts of the world use too much nitrogen fertilizer, and that harms the environment. He says the effects include air pollution, acid rain, loss of biodiversity, coastal dead zones, and global warming. So Professor Galloway and other researchers have developed a nitrogen footprint calculator. This web-based tool asks people about the foods they eat and questions like how much they fly and drive and how big a house they live in. Researchers say the average American produces 42 kilograms of nitrogen pollution a year. Some of that comes from fossil fuels like oil and coal, but more than 70% involves food. University of Virginia researcher Allison Leach says Americans eat almost twice as much protein as the government recommends. She says eating only the recommended levels could reduce nitrogen footprints by almost half. Professor Galloway says animal protein plays a big part. He points to the example of cattle that are given feed grown with nitrogen fertilizer. For large animals like beef, a very large fraction of the nitrogen that enters the cow's mouth is excreted out the back end, he says. Last year, a study supported by American beef producers found that their industry's environmental impact has decreased over the past 30 years. Jude Capper at Washington State University reported that by producing more beef from fewer animals, the industry cut its carbon footprint by 18%. The nitrogen calculator is currently designed for people in the United States, Germany, and the Netherlands. Another online calculator will be designed for India. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. For more ways to learn American English and stay informed every day, go to voaspecialenglish.com from your computer or mobile device.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Last week, our subject was illegal fishing. Now, we report on two cases where fish are both the victims and the offenders. The first involves two kinds of Asian carp, bighead and silver. They can grow more than a meter long and weigh up to 45 kilos. They eat huge amounts of plankton that other fish need to survive. Silver carp can also jump high and hit people in boats. Asian carp were brought to the United States in the 1970s as a solution. They were imported to eat algae and other microscopic organisms. They were put to work as cleaners at fish farms along the Mississippi River and in wastewater treatment systems. But now the fish are moving north toward the Great Lakes. They are making their way up a system built years ago to link the Mississippi to Lake Michigan. The dangers of an invasion are environmental and economic. The destructive carp could spread within the Great Lakes and threaten fishing and trade. The Army Corps of Engineers has put an electric fence in the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal. The underwater barrier is meant to shock the carp into turning back. Only one Asian carp was found among many thousands of fish killed with poison while part of the fence was being serviced. The barrier, however, may not be enough to protect the Great Lakes. There are calls in Congress for emergency action. Officials could close shipping connections between Lake Michigan and the upper Mississippi River system. But there are no decisions yet. So, that is the situation in the Midwest. Farther west, the problem is with common carp. Officials in Utah want to remove around 3/4 of the carp from Utah Lake. The lake near the city of Provo is the largest natural body of fresh water in the state. The state wants to remove millions of carp to protect an endangered species native only to Utah Lake, the June suckerfish. The carp eat plants that the suckers use as hiding places. Carp were first put into the lake in the 1880s as a food source. Now there are so many, experts say up to 20 metric tons a day could be removed with nets over a period of several years. But officials are fishing for ideas about what to do with all those fish, which could get pretty smelly. Ideas include using them to fill land, making them into liquid fertilizer, or letting people eat them. You can share your own suggestions at voaspecialenglish.com. And that's the VOA Special English Agriculture Report.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. In May, American officials suspended all fishing in parts of the Gulf of Mexico because of the huge oil spill. The restrictions gave scientists time to study the effects on seafood in the Gulf. The order extended from the mouth of the Mississippi River in Louisiana east to waters of Pensacola Bay in Florida. The affected waters include areas off the coasts of Mississippi and Alabama. On April 20th, an oil drilling rig, the Deepwater Horizon, exploded and sank about 80 kilometers from the Louisiana coast. BP is trying different ways to stop the leak from a damaged undersea well and control the spilled oil. The chief of British Petroleum blames failures by the rig's operator, Transocean of Switzerland. But BP says it will pay cleanup costs and all legitimate claims for losses and damages from the spill. BP is also hiring local fishing boats to help with the cleanup. 80% of the seafood eaten by Americans is imported, but the fishing industry in Louisiana is responsible for about a third of all seafood caught in the United States. The fishing ban did not affect state waters west of the Mississippi River. Those waters represent 77% of Louisiana's total seafood production. Ewell Smith from the Louisiana Seafood Promotion and Marketing Board says seafood from the unaffected area is safe to eat. Seafood is worth nearly $2.5 billion to the state. The spill happened shortly before the start of the fishing season for crab, shrimp, and oysters. Louisiana is the nation's leading producer of shrimp, oysters, crabs, crawfish, and alligators. Louisiana is also one of the world's largest producers of what some call the most important fish you've never heard of, menhaden. Menhaden and its oil are used in animal feed and other products. Another important industry along the Gulf is tourism. Coastal communities waited and watched for oil to arrive on their shores. Bad weather interfered with efforts to send out boats to clean up the oil and watch for the effects on wildlife in the Gulf of Mexico. Bird populations are among those at risk of being poisoned by the oil. Bird rescue groups set up stations, but they say finding injured birds in the huge spill and sending out boats to rescue them is a difficult job. And that's the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. You can find more reports about agriculture at voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Advice on how much fertilizer to use will soon be just a phone call away for rice farmers in the Philippines. The Philippine Department of Agriculture and the International Rice Research Institute plan to launch a free service in September. Farmers will call a number and a recorded voice will ask them simple questions in Tagalog or other languages, including English. For example, to get fertilizer guidelines for the wet season, they press 1. For the dry season, they press 2. Farmers will be asked about the size of their field and how many bags of rice it produced last year. What about natural sources of fertilizer? Does the farmer return rice straw to the field? Is the field near a lake or river that floods, or in a low area collecting soil and other material from nearby hills? About 10 minutes later, the farmer will get a text message. The message will advise what kind of fertilizer to use and how much. The grower will also get suggestions about when to plant and harvest the rice. Roland Burish at the International Rice Research Institute helped develop the system. Mr. Burish says fertilizer represents about 1/5 of the cost of inputs for rice production. He says the service could help farmers in the Philippines increase their yields and their profits. Danielle Nierenberg at the World Watch Institute, an environmental research group, says the system could also help reduce pollution. She said in the Philippines and all over Asia, fertilizer has been overused and misused because no one explains to farmers how much they need or how to use it. The technology could also be copied for crops in other places. Danielle Nierenberg has been traveling across sub-Saharan Africa. She says the cost of a cell phone there is low enough that most farmers have their own or borrow someone else's. In Zambia, for example, farmers without bank accounts can use their phones to buy seeds and fertilizers. They can also get information on how much their crop is selling for in city markets. She said they can decide whether they want to travel from their village to the city, because sometimes farmers get there and prices are too low. And that's the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. You can post comments on our website, voaspecialenglish.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at VOA Learning English. This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. There are growing concerns about food insecurity in the developing world. Rising food prices, weather emergencies, and political problems are deepening the struggles of families in many countries. 3 United Nations agencies published a report before World Food Day in October. This year's State of Food Insecurity in the World report says high prices are likely to continue. Gregory Barrow with the World Food Program in Rome says, if you look at the places where World Food Program works, particularly in developing countries, you see populations of people who might be spending 60, 70, 80% of their salaries on purchasing food for their families. The report says even short-term price increases can have a long-term effect. Reducing nutritious food early in a child's life can affect mental and physical development and limit future earnings. The United Nations has programs aimed at reducing the number of hungry people in the world by 50% by 2015. But most observers say this target is unlikely to be reached. East Africa is suffering its worst drought in years. In Kenya, at least 3.5 million people are going hungry, mostly in the north. Yet food is going to waste in central Kenya. Now, farmers there want the government to buy their food and get it to those in need. Farmers say bad roads and a lack of transportation make it difficult for them to get their produce to market. Storage is another problem, and they complain about a big drop in food prices. Nahashan Gitao farms almost 3 hectares, about a 90-minute drive from Nairobi. He says he regrets that he wastes at least 25% of his harvest while other Kenyans are hungry. He says the government should buy his food at a good price instead of asking for food from overseas. Economists say the imports reduce local food prices, decrease productivity, and increase dependency among the people. Mr. Gitao says if he could receive higher prices for his crops, he could feed more Kenyans. A Kinangop district official said her office does not get enough money from the central government to improve roads and take other steps to help farmers reach markets. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. Our programs are a way for people to read, listen, and learn American English and much more. You can download transcripts and MP3s of our stories at voaspecialenglish.com. From VOA Learning English, this is the Agriculture Report. Agriculture produces a lot of the heat-trapping gases that scientists link to rising temperatures and climate change. Agriculture also can be hurt by the effects of climate change. The World Watch Institute in Washington suggests ways that agriculture can reduce its effects on the environment. World Watch released a report called Innovations in Sustainable Agriculture, supporting climate-friendly food production. Researcher Danielle Nierenberg was one of its authors. She says 25 to 30% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture. This is because fertilizers, pesticides, antibiotic drugs, transportation, and processing are all dependent on oil, gas, and coal. Danielle Nierenberg says animal production has an especially big effect on the environment. She notes that more meat is being eaten in countries like Brazil, China, and India. As a result, more industrial factory farms are being built in the developing world. The report recommends 6 land and water use practices that it says are sustainable. These include growing trees on farmland to reduce soil erosion and planting cover crops to protect soil from drought, heat, and pests. Danielle Nierenberg says urban farming can help as well. Growing more food in cities can reduce transportation costs, she says. Urban residents then can buy food from within their communities. Other recommendations include recycling wastewater in cities, drip irrigation, and catching and storing rainwater. The United Nations estimates that changes in the agriculture industry could cut its carbon dioxide production by 88%. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. A cash crop is a crop grown for money. 400 years ago, the first cash crop for European colonists in North America was tobacco. American Indians were already growing it. Then in 1612, says tobacco.org, an Englishman named John Rolfe found that it would grow well in Virginia and sell profitably in England. But tobacco kills millions every year. Farmers face increasing government restrictions on tobacco use. They also face less demand from developed countries and more competition from developing ones. Some farmers now grow niche crops instead of or in addition to tobacco. Niche crops are aimed at a particular market, but choosing what to plant can be difficult. Professor Tony Johnston at Middle Tennessee State University says most tobacco farms are relatively small. The big issue for all of the tobacco growing states is to find those small crops, those niche crops that would provide enough cash flow with fairly similar amounts of area on which you plant your crops. Some tobacco farmers raise prawns or freshwater shrimp. This kind of shellfish is used in different foods and often served cold in what Americans call shrimp cocktails. The British call them prawn cocktails. Tennessee farmer Jane Corbin says she got into this aquaculture business because it sounded interesting. On a recent weekend, she and her sons harvested tobacco and prawns from the same field. The prawns grew for 5 months in a pond. The Corbins also raise cattle, along with flowers, vegetables, and other crops. Jane Corbin got into aquaculture in the late 1990s. Other tobacco farmers in the American South gave it a try because state and federal agencies were encouraging a change. It was advertised as an alternative to your tobacco crop as far as your income was concerned. That did not ring true. That wasn't why I got into it, but a lot of people did, and they saw that that was not a fact. Still, Professor Johnston says tobacco farmers are realizing they cannot depend on a single crop. The niche crops that seem to enjoy the most success, he says, are those that get consumers to visit the farm. G. James has bought prawns from the Corbins for years and enjoys helping with the harvest. It's their kindness and their genuine spirit that I keep on coming back here. What she especially likes, she says, is that the prawns are from right there in Tennessee. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Pursuti.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Not all research begins with a plan. Some studies begin by accident. Meredith Schaefer says that is what happened with her and Cynthia Sagers. Cynthia Sagers is a biology professor at the University of Arkansas. Meredith Schaefer is a graduate student. They were traveling in the state of North Dakota on a project. They noticed pretty yellow flowers. They recognized them as canola. Farmers grow canola for seeds to make cooking oil. Canola is also used for animal feed and biofuel. But the canola plants they saw were not growing in farm fields. They were growing along the road. The researchers decided to test the plants. They had brought along special testing papers for the project they were working on. They crushed some of the leaves in water and added the test strips. The results showed that the weedy canola plants contained genetic changes. If a plant is genetically modified, that means its genes have been changed to produce desired qualities. This past summer, the researchers from Arkansas went back to North Dakota. This time, they went on a road trip to find canola. They traveled more than 5,000 kilometers. They stopped about every 8 kilometers to count plants and take samples to test in their vehicle. What they found, they say, was the first discovery in the United States of wild canola plants with modified genes. Meredith Schaefer presented the findings at a recent meeting of the Ecological Society of America. The scientists found canola plants in almost half of the places they investigated. They tested a total of 288 plants. They found that 80% of those plants contained genes from genetically engineered canola. Some crop plants are modified to resist damage from the chemicals that farmers spray to kill weeds. There are 2 proteins that can give canola the ability to resist 2 commonly used herbicides. One protein gives resistance against glyphosate. The other protein gives resistance against glufosinate. 2 of the plants growing in the wild showed resistance to both kinds of weed killers. Professor Sagers says canola varieties with these genetic qualities have not been released on the market. This suggests the result of wild populations reproducing on their own. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can read and listen to our programs at voaspecialenglish.com. I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. The United States is making the first major changes in its food safety rules since the 1930s. A new law called the Food Safety Modernization Act will govern all foods except meat, poultry, and some egg products. It calls for increased government inspections of food processors, and it lets the Food and Drug Administration order the recall of unsafe foods. That agency has only been able to negotiate with manufacturers to remove products from the market. The new law also increases requirements for imported foods. But the law excludes small farmers and processors from the same rules as large producers. And it does not require sellers at farmers markets and food stands to meet the highest requirements. That pleases Susan Perlman, director of the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. She said a one-size-fits-all approach would have put small farmers and ranchers out of business, or it would have prevented them from providing locally produced, healthy, fresh food to consumers. The Consumer Federation of America says it is generally pleased with the new law. So is much of the food industry. But Republican Representative Jack Kingston of Georgia questioned whether enough people get sick from food to justify the spending. The legislation could cost the government almost $1.5 billion over 5 years. In December, federal officials lowered their estimates of how many Americans each year get sick from food. The new estimates are 48 million, or 1 in 6 people. 128,000 are hospitalized, and 3,000 die. The old estimates included 76 million illnesses and 5,000 deaths. Experts at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention made their last estimates in 1999. Officials say the difference is largely the result of improvements in data and research methods. They say the 2 estimates cannot be compared to measure trends. Yet one thing has not changed. About 80% of illnesses spread by food are still listed as having been caused by unspecified agents. In other words, no one really knows which bacteria, viruses, or other organisms were responsible. But in cases with a known cause, the experts say salmonella is responsible for more than 1/3 of hospitalizations, and it causes more than 1/4 of deaths. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. From VOA Learning English, we bring you news about agriculture in Special English. Each year, bad food sickens about 1 in 6 Americans, but proposed new rules raise hopes to improve food safety. Officials say the changes could prevent more than 1 million cases of food-related illnesses each year. The new rules were proposed recently, exactly 2 years after President Obama signed the Food Safety Modernization Act. The rules are the first step in putting that law into effect. They represent the biggest changes in food safety since the 1930s. The new law makes the Food and Drug Administration responsible for preventing foodborne illnesses. Experts say this is a change in the way that the FDA has dealt with disease outbreaks in the past. Congress passed the law after a series of outbreaks that were linked to spinach, peanut butter, and other foods. The agency is proposing to require food manufacturers to show that they have identified where contamination is most likely to happen. Manufacturers would also have to show that they have taken steps to prevent problems. The proposed rules also deal with safety in growing and harvesting fruits and vegetables. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that establishing all of the provisions of the law will cost the government $1.4 billion. The Grocery Manufacturers of America, an industry group, has not released an estimate of what it will cost producers. But FDA Deputy Commissioner Michael Taylor says the new rules are worth the cost. He says there should be reductions in illness and disruptions in the food supply and increases in buyer confidence. He says when these issues are considered, the benefits outweigh the costs of the new law. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Scientists have discovered more details about how plants use water. Their findings could help to engineer plants that grow better and more effectively in conditions with higher levels of carbon dioxide. Plants naturally take in carbon dioxide they need for photosynthesis, the process of changing light energy to chemical energy. The carbon dioxide enters the plants through tiny holes or pores on the surface of leaves. However, each time a plant takes in 1 molecule of carbon dioxide gas, it loses hundreds of water molecules. Scientists say plants lose 95% of the water they take in through these pores. Some plants' pores can tighten to save water during conditions of high carbon dioxide. Other plants are not able to do this as well. Now, scientists know how these tiny pores tighten in plants. Julian Schroeder is a professor of biology at the University of California, San Diego. Mr. Schroeder says that carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere are much higher now than they were in the past. However, he says, many plants are not closing their pores in order to hold in more water. He and his team have identified proteins that control the tightening of a plant's pores. The proteins are enzymes called carbonic anhydrases. The findings were published in the journal Nature Cell Biology. Mr. Schroeder believes the enzymes could be changed in some plants to increase their ability to store water. The researchers added carbonic anhydrase genes to plants that do not react to higher levels of carbon dioxide. They observed that for every molecule of carbon dioxide taken in by the plants, they lost 44% less water. The scientists say the photosynthesis process continued normally in these plants. They say this suggests that changing plants to save more water will not affect plant growth. This method might be used to help engineer food crops that are resistant to extremely dry conditions. The discovery could help farmers meet a growing demand for food as water supplies decrease. However, the scientists say more research is needed. And that's the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. For transcripts, MP3s, and podcasts of our reports, visit us on the web at voaspecialenglish.com.